Hello and welcome once again to the Power Lunch live show for December 2nd, 2022. You may notice I have a different background. It's because my old background was slightly out of date. I need to update some things on it. But the big thing I'm focusing on right now is, in fact, the Entrepreneur Mentor community, which is a community of awesome people of character and integrity that you can trust to give you good advice and support. So you can learn more about it at guyknowsaguy.com/EMC, and you can come hang out with us, the mentors and the community, this a week from Monday, December 12th at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Go to emc.coach/launch. So that's enough about me. You've had enough time to find the live feed. Let's meet the guest. As I saw Steve, we have between 1 and 4 guests on this show. I've never had 0. I have had as many as 6. So Steve is the guest who showed up, and he gets to be on the show. Because 90% of life is showing up. So, Steve, you already got an A-. You got a 90. Good job. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Michael.
So ordinarily, we start by having all of the guests go around and do a quick introduction about themselves, and then we'll have the guests in order share a bit of their topic, and then we'll have a conversation. Obviously, we have one. We'll go all the way around to all the guests. So, all of our guests, Steve, tell us a bit about yourself and what you do and what makes you awesome.
Sure. So I have been blessed to have worked with 7 startup companies, all of whom have successfully exited, whether that is a public offering or a sale, creating $5 billion in shareholder value. I'm author of Amazon bestseller, Be a Startup Superstar, and my new book actually debuts on Tuesday of next week, called High Velocity Digital Marketing. And I'm told by the publisher it has a great shot of being on the top 3 of the Wall Street Journal bestseller list.
That sounds like a high velocity launch.
I hope so.
Fantastic. And so the topic you sent was high velocity digital marketing. So tell us a bit about that concept and what it's all about.
Sure. So I read a survey a while back that said that it was actually done by McKinsey, where 83% of CEOs expected their marketing to drive most of their company's revenue growth. Yet, most of those same CEOs are dissatisfied with the return on their marketing investments. And many sales and marketing leaders, they feel overwhelmed by revenue expectations that they can't meet. And this is impacting companies of all sizes across multiple industries. And fundamentally, the way people buy has totally changed, and that buyers rely on digital content to make purchase decisions. And so the book is very much how to, but it is all about how you can accelerate revenue growth online, given the new way that buyers are purchasing products and services today.
So at a very high level, how are they doing it differently now than they were, say, 20 years ago?
Right. So here's a great example. Think about it in your own life. If you're going to go buy a car, you probably, the first thing you're going to do is, well, let me tell you what you're not going to do. You're probably not going to race out to 10 dealerships to get that wonderful opportunity to speak with 10 different sales representatives. Nothing against those representatives at all, but that just isn't what people do. What they'll do is they'll get on Google. They'll Google the different cars that they might be looking for. They'll do some research about those cars. They might go to the manufacturer's site if they're purchasing a new car and actually build it out and see what it looks like. They'll do some research to find out how much that car should actually cost them. And then they'll read reviews about that car. So in many ways, just purchasing a car is a great example, is that the purchaser might know as much about that car or more than the sales representative that they're going to actually meet with. And so people now go online, they do a tremendous amount of research or some level of research prior to purchasing, which means that you've got to be great online. And many companies, just their sales and marketing, haven't properly adapted to that new reality.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up cars. I used to sell cars, and we recently bought a new car, and that online process and the in dealership process is a pretty awful experience. When we bought a Kia. I went on the Kia website and tried to go to the configurator and build the car out, and it was slow and clunky. And I just want to be like, I want click, 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 click. I don't want to be sliding between animations and waiting for stuff to load. I just want the info. And we had to slog through it. And then the dealership website was useless. The salesman literally didn't know anything. He just started 3 days ago. Didn't know anything about the car, didn't know anything about how to find cars. And absolutely in that space, a car dealership with a highly engaging, informative website or a salesperson who's helping you and answering your questions, solving them, will dominate the competition, because you're going to stop looking right there. You're like, okay, this is my place. I don't want to have to go to this other websites. This is my home now. I'm going to stay here and find a car here because I don't want to go into that other process.
Yeah, exactly. And the concept behind high velocity digital marketing is profoundly simple. You talked about their site slowing you down, and probably even if you built it, if you went to the dealership, I'll bet that the connection between their marketing website and then the dealership wasn't there where it should be, where you should be able to walk in and say, look, I just built this car. Here's the car that I built. And then they should be able to look up your name and the query that you did to be able to know exactly what you were looking for. But then you probably had to start from scratch all over again. And so that the concept between a highly efficient digital marketing approach is simple. And what it's all about is the quicker you convert digital content-based leads into paying customers, the more successful your business. Time is money, and the single metric that reveals the most about time and money is velocity. And yet, like, that velocity is often overlooked. It's rarely managed. And as a result, what you really want to be able to do is to shorten the time it takes for prospects to move through your pipeline to close deal faster, such that you're able to grow revenue at a higher rate in less time. And it sounds simple, right? I mean, nothing that I just said sounds like it should be hard to understand. Yet, so few organizations do it right, which is why I wrote sort of a how-to book, so that people could learn, here's how you do it, and then take that advice and literally implement it, some of it that day.
Nice. Yeah. No, that's fantastic. I think sometimes, you'll hear this, well, it's on the website. I get that from my daughter's school all the time, when I'm like, I can't, I don't know when these things are happening. I don't know what's going on. You don't tell us anything. They're like, well, it's on the website. I'm like, okay, on the website doesn't mean I can find it. I don't have 20 minutes for a research project. So somewhere on the website doesn't do any good. And so if it's a sales process, like, well, what they need is on the website. But it doesn't have to be on the website. It has to be in front of them when they want to see it.
Well, and it needs to be in front of them, and it needs to be where they are in their buyer's journey, right? I mean, sometimes people are just trying to get themselves educated. And so what content do you have to educate those people? Other times they're looking to evaluate products. Usually organizations have that stuff, right? And so it's a key that you've got to have content across the full spectrum of the buyer's journey. But then also a great way for an organization to understand whether or not their content is actually good is if they are growing their visitors to their website quarter in and quarter out, but they have at least a 5% visitor to lead capture rate, that's when you know you have a website that is actually performing, where people find that your content is compelling, that they're willing to do things that, for example, I will never do, almost never, which is put my name, my email address, my phone number, maybe like in a form, because I don't do it because I don't want to be hounded. So if you've got a 5% visitor lead conversion rate, it means that your content is so good that you are intriguing, attracting, and capturing the imagination of those visitors such that you can convert them into leads.
Interesting. Yeah. Hey, I'm thinking about an ad I saw this morning. I saw it on Facebook, and it sent me to a page on my phone that I could barely read because it was so tiny. But it looked like a cool concept. One of those like rip-a-day calendars, but with an adventure game, like a role-playing game on the calendar. So it's like an adventure every day. I'm like, oh, that sounds cool. But there were 7 different products. Like one was just the calendar, and one had the whole some gold dice, and one had this, and one had that. And I couldn't tell which one was the entry level. Like which one was the one that if you buy this, you'll have everything you need, just not the bonus stuff. And I ended up putting my email address in because my thought was, I don't have time to figure this out. I don't have the attention span. I'll put my email in, and if they can sell it to me later, I'll get it. And if they can't, I won't. So I'll leave it to them to do the follow-up. But it looked interesting, but I couldn't figure out how to buy it. Like which of the too many options in no particular order I should take advantage of.
Yeah, well, clearly that's a webmaster that probably needs to read my book. But without question, I mean, there are a lot of websites that might even have a lot of great information, but they're complex. You can't find what you need. They're not scannable. They're not organized in an intuitive way. They don't have their forms above the fold. They'll have blog posts where they are just looking for people to leave a comment rather than asking them to do something. They don't offer enough validation and proof. And so there's just so many sort of mistakes that organizations make, or another way to look at it is opportunity to turn their websites into lead magnets.
Yeah, I see that a lot in the coaching space. A lot of what I do is working with people in the joint ventures, coaching, virtual events, summits, all that kind of thing. And often someone will send me to I'll see some swipe copy, that comes through in an email from a partner, and it sends me to a landing page, and the landing page is just, when you see enough of these, you see the framework under it, and it's like just standard marketing hero's journey stuff. And I realized I don't know what you're selling. You're selling the solution to a problem. But because the philosophy is, you're not selling an email list, you're selling money. But so many of them jump to like, do you need more revenue? Well, we're going to get you more revenue through this amazing program. Come and see it. I'm like, but what is it?
Well, yeah. And here's a great example of this. If you look at the last startup that I ran marketing for, it was in the cybersecurity space. It was a company with sort of a funny name called Thycotic. I realize it sounds a little bit like psychotic, but Thycotic. And I remember on that very first day that I joined, it was after the company had received an influx of venture capital. Revenue had flatlined for 2 quarters in a row, and the company was about $5 million in annual revenue. And I met with the founders and the management team, and I asked them. I said, "Well, who's your customer? Who's your ideal target customer?" And so here's a company that was $5 million, and they said, "Steve, we're a cybersecurity company. You're supposed to be this big time CMO. I mean, of course, it's the VP of IT security. It's the Chief Information Security Officer." And I shook my head and I said, yep, got it. And then I started to interview the customers, which in the example that you gave, a lot of companies don't talk to customers enough. And what I found was, and then when they do, they ask the wrong questions. So I started interviewing the customers, and what I found was my first aha moment, which was that the customer who they thought was buying their products really wasn't. It wasn't the VPs of IT security. It was the IT admins. It was the techies in the trenches who wore multiple hats, who were responsible for administering systems. Downtime was unacceptable. And what they wanted was simplicity. They wanted fast. They wanted the security for sure. But they were never going to be hanging out online where the VPs of IT security were. They were never going to read a Gartner analyst report. They might read reports from their peers or reviews. They wanted information delivered to them in a certain way, right? And this is like a lot of just by interviewing the customers. Imagine if I would have started by doing a digital marketing program and trying to restore revenue growth, which we did in the very first quarter, and hit our numbers every quarter for 5 years until we got to 145 million 5 years later and sold for 1.4 billion. And basically I would have been wasting money left and right. And so, and then like a lot of times companies don't ask the right questions. Here's an example of that, is that a lot of times if a company is actually talking to their customers, their questions somehow just mysteriously align with the products they sell, right? It's almost like they're trying to sell while they're asking the question, rather than asking questions like about the status quo, for example. And the status quo matters because oftentimes you don't lose business to a competitor. You lose business to something like when the customer says to you, you know, what we've got today is good enough. Yeah. We're not interested. And so when you ask them questions about the status quo and how's that working for them and what tools do they use, for example, and how do they currently solve the challenges today that your company might be addressing, and really focus in on the status quo just as one category of questions, now you're starting to understand the full context of the buyer's world. And in the example that you gave, clearly they did not understand the full context of your world. And as a result, their messaging missed the mark. And when their messaging missed the mark, it basically means this, is that when I would be interviewing customers, I would keep a Google spreadsheet and I would be capturing the words and the phrases that the customers used, because it's amazing. A lot of organizations believe that if they could just deliver some clever marketing message, as you were alluding to, that silver bullet is going to capture the day, but it doesn't. What captures the day actually is when a buyer perceives that your organization understands them and empathizes with them, and speaking their language proves you do just that. That company probably should listen to the last segment. They might benefit a lot.
Definitely does. Definitely sounds that way. And I think in that space, especially at the upper levels, they get a lot more number focused and less people focused. So they're looking at, A/B tested this, and this one tested slightly better than that one, and so we're going to use it. But they're not actually stopping to think, how do people respond to this? How do they perceive this?
Sometimes the A/B testing it's good. There's nothing wrong with it. But usually if you have massive volume to your website, it could really move the needle. But if you don't, it's going to be like incremental improvement when you're trying to do like a complete student body left to grow revenue. And that little like 0.1% change is nice, and someone might present it to you. There's nothing wrong with it, clearly, but it's, for many companies, not going to move that pipeline or revenue needle. And as a result, it's not a waste of time, but it's not much more than that.
Yeah, something else that'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on is the follow-up process. Because with a lot of businesses, people come to the website and like I did with this company, I put my email address in because I didn't know what to buy. I didn't have the time. I didn't know if I had the money handy. So I was like, I'll put my email address in. I can't remember you, so you remember me and get back to me. And a lot of the companies I've come across and a lot of the companies I've worked with, they don't actually, especially in the joint venture coaching space, because they're a lot of them are very focused on supporting their partners and their partners supporting them. They forget to support themselves. So a lot of what they send out is stuff about their partners. But oftentimes, especially for larger items, people don't buy because now is not the time. It's not the right time of year. They don't have the budget, the money, inclination, whatever. But the right time might be a month from now, 3 months, 6 months. And I find a lot of companies either don't nurture the audience or they beat on the audience. Like, the car dealership we got our car from, they're just sending us like these canned emails that are like, "Dear bracket customer name, thank you for your purchase of your bracket car model." And so that doesn't, we're not going to buy a car for another 3 or 4, I think 8 years. My wife probably thinks 3. But we're not going to buy a car for a while. And so they, just pounding on me with emails is just going to annoy me, not make me say, "Oh, I can't wait to get back there and re-enjoy that experience." So what do you find is the most effective for the people who don't buy but are in the right market?
Yeah. So you talked about the follow-up experience, and that is really a great point that you brought up. And let me give you a great example of how to get to outstanding follow-up experience. So in the last company, just using that as an example that I was at, so that people could sort of hear this and then interpret it from their perspective at their company. So the first thing that we did is, I had mentioned that we created and always have created content across the full spectrum of the buyer's journey, from discover to consider to evaluate down through to purchase. And just using one example of that content was when we were selling to those IT admins, and our security solution was all around securing what was known as privileged passwords. And these were the passwords that exist across a organization's infrastructure, their operating systems, databases, applications. If bad people get a hold of those, then they've got the keys to the kingdom. So if you ask these IT admins, how many of these privileged passwords do you have that you've got to manage and secure? Incredibly, most of them had no idea, right? And it's not surprising to some extent, because infrastructures are pretty complex and oftentimes they're rapidly changing. So in our paid for product, we had a discovery function. And so it would go out and discover what you had. And so I made the decision that we were going to give away that discovery function for free. And that we would create this beautiful report that would say, here is the privileged passwords that you have. We just sort of would designate it to specific environments so we could target it even further, Unix or Microsoft. And then we would give this beautiful report that would say, here's what you have. Here are the risks associated with that. And here's what you would need to do if you actually wanted to fix that manually. Of course, most organizations didn't want to do that. And then we would give them a grade, like they're in university, A through F, right? And then, because we captured the size of their company, the industry that they're in, and their geography, we now we're able to, the very next day, send that, not only give them immediate feedback, give them, here's the privileged passwords you have, immediately. Here's your grade, A through F. And then the very next day, they would get an email from us that would show them how they compared to their peer group, right? So companies in the same industry, the same size, the same geography, which everybody always wants to know, gee, how do I compare? How do I compare? And so right away, they got in the habit, because there was content they really wanted to see the results of opening up our emails. Now, while that started happening, we did something, again, it's not rocket science, but you'd be surprised how few organizations do it, is then we would train our sales team on every piece of content that was being developed. And by our sales team, our direct sales team, as well as our partners, who we treated like they were part of the family. So we would train them on how to properly follow up. So then our salespeople would be following up, and yeah, they were aggressive, pushy salespeople. We wanted them to be that way. But when they followed up, they would follow up and say, gee, so what grade did you get? Where did you do well? Where didn't you do well? Would you be interested in learning how we might be able to help you to improve and do better? Now, just simply teaching them how to follow up and properly leveraging that content in a consultative way changed the complete dynamic of the relationship. They were no longer viewed as pushy, aggressive salespeople, and make no mistake, they were under pressure to perform. But the way in which they were perceived by the prospect was completely different. They were consultative. They were just trying to help. Hey, if you weren't interested in learning more, then they knew they were trained to then offer up a different piece of content, not to push too hard, see if they could get a response out of that. If they were interested, they knew where to go next, right? And that really set us on a course where our relationship was perceived as different right from the get-go. So if you're training up your sales team and your partner team, if you have a very natural follow-up where someone is like, oh, I want that info, I want to learn how I compare versus our peers, it enables that follow-up then to be world-class, which is all about what a high-velocity sales and marketing model sort of helps an organization to have.
Yeah, I like the fact that it's so personal. It's you create something they want. You know, they want the answer to that. I know a number of people who use who build quiz funnels. So their top of the funnel process is, you know, take this quiz. What type of business are you? What personality type are you? What sales style are you? Whatever it is, and you're like, oh, I want to know what sales style I am. And then the businesses that really use it well will then engage based on that, or they'll follow up and they'll say, what did you think about this? And one of the best I saw was one of my clients, he had a workshop where prior to the workshop, they'd send 4 quizzes. So you'd know like your human design type and your, I think it was a disc profile and something else. And so we then refer to that in the workshop. People are like, oh, I know what that is. I know what mine is. And they'd feel seen because it was theirs, not just, hey, everybody in the audience. So I think it's really powerful to give them something they want to talk about. And of course, and with the sale, I've sold a whole bunch of things. And the most painful process is when they say, like, follow up with this person. Why? I don't have anything to follow up about. But there's a reason to follow up. You've got that information, you've got that value, and it gives you a reason to have that conversation again.
Yeah, and we had sort of a best practices sales playbook that we created and trained our sales reps and our partners, as well as our marketing team. Marketing and sales always went to the same training, for example, so that
that's revolutionary right there.
Yeah, so that they were always aligned and working towards the same goal, which of course was revenue growth. Mm-hmm. And when you combine sort of what I was giving the example with a lot of that other methodology training on in and around communication styles, learning how to be a better listener, right? All of which when it comes together, it enables an organization to have a lot of very wealthy salespeople.
Yeah, that's huge. I'm thinking about how about marketing and sales mating together. I worked for an insurance company where we'd get leads that were 9 months old, and we'd call people up and say, "Hey, fill out a card," and they'd be like, "That was in January," if they remember it all. And it's that sloppy handoff from marketing to sales, and nobody thought anything of it. They're like, "Well, that's just the way it is."
Yeah.
Lead. If they need it then, they need it now. Just call them. I'm like, what?
If you take the organizations that are the most successful, they are so by design, right? And so and when I say that, what I mean is that there are metrics, there are numbers actually behind what you were referring to. And they're actively managed. Let me give you some examples. At the last company, again, that I was at, that I'm sort of staying with so that all of these examples are consistent, that we knew that that basically we had always that 5% website visitor to lead conversion rate or above. But then what we also knew was that our overall lead to opportunity rate needed to be at least 13%. And that the average lead to opportunity, and of course, only a salesperson could designate a lead as an opportunity, which of course is BANT qualified or pipeline, was about 15 days. Our opportunity to close rate was 22%. We knew that our average lead to close time was 66 days. We knew that our overall lead to close rate was 3%. We knew that our customer acquisition costs were roughly about 10 months. So why did I throw out all those numbers? Not really to be random, but to say that those were metrics and numbers that I personally would be reviewing across the full sales funnel on a literally almost an everyday basis to see how we were doing. And we created, I created my own set of Tableau dashboards that sat on top of Salesforce.com in order to do that. And so we knew exactly where we needed to be. We could break it down to an individual rep level, right, to see how it was working, not only across geographies or into individual territories, right? And so the world has really moved into this more high velocity model, but to be high velocity means that you've got to understand the metrics and the numbers behind it all and actively manage to it.
Now, so you mentioned, this company was I think it said 5 million, got to 100 something million, and probably car dealerships, fairly larger companies. How does this apply to smaller, solopreneurs, $100,000 a year coaches, or aspiring $100,000 a year coaches, small service providers, people like that? How do these principles apply to companies that don't have a marketing department but have a owner, and that's the company?
Well, hugely, right? And so, first of all, your website still has to convert. I mean, do you have a get a quote button at the top of your homepage? If you don't, you ought to get one in there like pronto, because that will be one of your highest converting things that you have. Minimize friction in your forms that you have on your website. Think Google's homepage is blindingly simple. There's white space. I've seen, if you reduce the number of fields that you have from like 4 down to 2, you could increase your conversions by 50%. Aligning the call to action with your landing page copy, offering up exclusive or upgraded content to some of the free content that you're already giving away creates a sense of urgency and could dramatically increase leads. Adding more validation and proof onto your website. Social proof is the new word of mouth, right? And, everybody wants to feel like they're not taking a risk. Every single thing that I just mentioned is a simple thing that a mom and pop shop actually could do on their website, like today, and have it ready for Monday, right? And then their website conversion rate will go up. I can assure you. Those are a few of many of the sort of recommendations that I provide very specifically right in high velocity digital marketing.
Yeah, I love it. One thing to do with my site, I don't have a tech team. I'm basically the team, and I'm sure there's tools that can do the thing, the pop-ups and whatnot, but I didn't have them. So, but I realized, what do I want my site to do? I want people to get into my community, and the first way to do my community is be on the email list. And so, like, well, if that's the thing I want, shouldn't that be the thing I lead with? And I put a email opt-in form at the top of the website. Said, get a copy of my book right at the top of the website, which they can do right there since I'm here. Get a copy of my book right at the top of the website. Put your email in. You'll be in my community. You'll hear about what I'm doing. You hear about what's going on. Because originally it was I think it was originally on a separate page, and then it was at the bottom, and then I realized, like, what is the main thing this is supposed to do? It's supposed to, because my services, I'm not just selling them to the public. It's I'm very selective who I work with, but I at least want them in my community, and I want them on the email list. So since that's the first thing I wanted, it's the first thing you see. Because it seemed to me, and hopefully you agree, that the thing that I want them to do, like similar to for the kind of company that does a quote, if you're a general contractor, get a quote should be the button at the top, because sometimes you're like, Steve, what does your service cost? Oh, look, get a quote. As opposed to slogging through your life story and where you went to college and a picture of your dogs. And
you got it all right. You want it above the fold. But here's another thing that a lot of smaller businesses don't take into account, is that people are using their phones to look at your websites, right? And too few websites are mobile responsive. And by mobile responsive, I mean, for example, it gets smaller when you shrink it left to right. It can accommodate a smaller screen. Things stack up. Where the design is minimized, think usability, quick load times, etc. A lot of entrepreneurs don't actually regularly look at their own websites on their phone. And like some of them may be great. Some of them might be aghast to see how it is presented. Right. And so that's something that you would need to work with with whoever helps you with your website. But again, it's something that often is overlooked that could really impact the results that you ultimately generate from your website, and then therefore your revenue.
Yeah. Well, and I think something to look out for, because I do my own website, and you can tell, and I use WordPress, but the WordPress automatically, through the most templates, will be mobile responsive. So because I don't know how to get fancy, I can't screw it up that badly. So my simple website, when you look at it on the phone, works on the phone. And that's something I think people watch out for, is they get something fancier. It's like, oh, I can put it exactly where I want. I can put the boxes here and the images there, and there's this whole grid design. And be like, yeah, but how's that grid going to collapse onto a phone? Because it's going to take your two-dimensional thing and make it one-dimensional. And sometimes not the way you were hoping.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So these are all just various ideas that organizations can go look at and get better and do it quickly.
Yeah, that's great. That's some good stuff for large and small organizations. And so this has been some really useful stuff. Are there any other messages that you would have for an entrepreneurial audience of common mistakes you're seeing from small companies and things they need to be watching out for?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that you really have got to pay close attention to your content, right? And in particular, to make sure, and I wanted to emphasize this, that you have content across the full buyer's journey, whether that's educate, the consider phase, evaluate phase, all the way down through to purchase, because a lot of times your visitors, they're at different stages.
Mm.
And you've got to be able to attract them for where they are, not where maybe you might want them to be. And that nothing zaps the velocity out of a high velocity model than a gap in content across any of those buyer journey phases, right? So take a look at the content that you have, map it against a simple buyer's journey process, and see if you have gaps. If you do, fill them. Fill those gaps as quickly as you can.
That's a powerful concept. So, so this is your website, of course. Be a startup superstar. That's my hobby, is misreading websites. But so it's be a startup superstar. And is that the best way for people to connect with you?
It is, yes. You can connect with me at that site or message me on LinkedIn.
And I imagine if they go there, they will find content that will meet them wherever they are in the buyer's journey.
Well, they certainly will find my books, TED Talks, and podcasts for sure.
Fantastic. Excellent. Well, this has been great to have you on here. As I mentioned before to you and to our audience, ordinarily we have this is our roundtable discussion, and the roundtable is just you and me on the opposite sides of one round table. But it's always fun. As I said, my producers are serendipity and random happenstance. So if only Steve shows up to the show, then only Steve was meant to show up to the show, because he had that much content to share with us, and it was pretty good stuff. So I think that's a pretty good show. So good job, universe, for bringing Steve. Thank you, Steve, for bringing the content. And thank you, audience, for listening to Steve bring the content. This has been a great show. Any final words from you, Steve?
That people have a lot of what they need to succeed. And certainly if you want to accelerate revenue in the future, you've got to be great online. You've got to be great in Google. And hopefully if I've offered just one idea that you could implement to accelerate revenue growth, and for me, this is a valuable time spent.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. And a reminder again that a week from Monday, we're doing the Entrepreneur Launch Party, which is a party both celebrating your successes and with some hot seat coaching to help you create new successes. And you can visit once for free without becoming an EMC member. So go to emc.coach/launch. Thank you to our audience for watching. Thank you to Steve for being our entire panel, carrying the whole load. Well done. And thank you. I thanked everyone. So thank you. That's enough gratitude. I'm done. Thanks for watching.